All right, y'all, welcome back. This is going to be chapter 8, Global Political Economy. This is more my expertise. So, grad school, I studied political economy and conflict. This is by Gunther Wolzenbach. The only thing from the intro is sort of, this is the idea that we're mixing politics and economics to try and get a more contextualized view of how these things work. Section 2, liberal approaches. There are potential issues, right, with unfettered capitalism in global economics. We have the issues of global inequality, global poverty, corporate expropriation, right? Some states will actually take foreign direct investment or corporations, etc., and nationalize them. And then we also have the problem of like how do we approach recessions and depressions, right? And so if we look at 2008, the economic collapse in the United States, there were wildly varying ideas on how to approach this, right? The seminal philosophers of political economy are Adam Smith, right, who wrote The Wealth of Nations. This is the guy who coined the term the invisible hand of the market. And the idea is to just let prices be determined by supply and demand mechanisms rather than government intervention, right? And there was a good quote here. This is a process whereby consumers seek the best quality for the lowest prices, and this, in turn, compels successful producers to find the lowest cost method of production. This is sort of a utopian perspective on it, though, right? Because without government intervention, we know there's exploitation of labor. We know there can be collusion between companies to keep prices high. We know there can be monopolies or oligopolies where that sort of disconnects this idea of the invisible hand of the market, right? There has to be competition for this to work. And if you have a monopoly or an oligopoly or collusion between corporations, the invisible hand is non-existent, right? You're manipulating the market. And so Adam Smith's sort of perspective is really utopian, right? Another really famous philosopher, political economist, is David Ricardo. And this is the guy who came up with the idea of a comparative advantage. Under Ricardo's regime, you basically have land, labor, and capital, right? The three mechanisms of production. Under more contemporaneous times, China actually has added the idea of data as the fourth. But under Ricardo, it was land, labor, capital, and those countries with an advantage in each should focus on that, um, build up whatever sector of the economy they're good at, and then use trade to bolster their side and to get the stuff that they can't do, right? Finally, they didn't really mention him in the book, but I think John Maynard Keynes needs a mention. All of economics generally before that was supply side economics based on Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and others. But when we hit the Great Depression in the World War II period under FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we had mass unemployment, mass starvation. And the problem was, yeah, you can supply all you want, but no one has money to spend. So how the hell are you going to sell your products, right? And this is where John Maynard Keynes said, look, sometimes when things are going awry, we need to focus on demand side, right? And this is why he said, just put people to work, put money in people's pockets, even if they're not really producing anything, right? That way, they can spend in the economy and get the system rolling again. And once the system is rolling again, we can sort of back away from that demand side economics. We can reduce, government funded jobs. We can reduce, social safety net payments, all of these things. But when we are in bad times, we need to push demand, and we're in good times, we need to push supply, right? So I really wanted to add John Maynard Keynes because he's probably the father of demand side, political economy. Okay. Section 3, individual actors, right? Uh, it should be pointed out that the political economy affects not only states and corporations, but obviously also individuals, right? So a good example is the 2008 banking and insurance crisis. What happened was they were bundling mortgages, right? Instead of a bank betting on your single mortgage and whether you would be able to pay it over time, um, insurance companies and banks were bundling thousands or even tens of thousands of mortgage contracts, and the what are they called? The bond rating agencies were calling them AAA plus, right? Because historically mortgages were a good bet, but they didn't do their due diligence, right? And so these banks and insurance companies were pumping billions of dollars into these investments, thinking that they were uber safe investments, right? Because they're mortgages. Um, but there was really piss poor risk assessment. There was also this super reduction in the lending industry, right? Of limits on lending, and so lending during the 1990s and early 2000s got extraordinarily out of hand. People without jobs were getting mortgages for $500,000 houses. Um, people who were, say you're, and this is no down on it, but say you're in sort of a low level job, you're making minimum wage, or you're a janitor, or you're I don't know, a cafeteria lady or whatever, and they were giving these people $300,000, $500,000 mortgages because they didn't even have to declare their income, which is absolutely wild in my opinion. And so, um, as all of these thousands and thousands of people were trying to get into the housing market because we're told that housing is a great investment, but they weren't assessing the risk. They were just handing anyone who wanted one a mortgage. Well, this caused the collapse of the banking, the housing, and the insurance market. And as it collapses, you get worldwide contagion. It was not just America's problem, right? It spread across the planet because investment companies, banks, insurance companies, whatever, from across the planet were investing in these subprime mortgage packages. And so you saw this collapse across the planet, and very few countries were untouched. And so you get this, the response from America, first under Bush 2, and then second under Obama, who came in just shortly after, was instead of helping individual mortgage holders pay for their mortgages, they bought out the banks, right? They pumped trillions of dollars into these insurance companies and these massive banks under the claim that they were too big to fail, right? And just let individual borrowers get screwed and have their mortgages revoked, instead of backing the mortgage holders to pay off those banks and help them become healthy. Instead, they ignored individuals and helped these massive corporations. And so this was an absolute mess. And since then, I would suggest, and many other researchers suggest, that this has helped cause this furor among individual voters, and it's helped sort of fuel the rise of these far right parties in many nations. And so, the example in the United States was the Tea Party, and of course, their platform has been co-opted by the Republicans ever since. And so the Tea Party has sort of disappeared, but they just got melded into the right. And you're getting a lot of this across Europe as well. And the other example I think is good is the migration crisis, right? So, ever since, I don't know, the 2010s or so, you've had civil conflict and inequality leading to mass migration. So you had the Syrian civil war and the Arab Spring in North Africa, um, which have caused internal revolutions, the collapses of entire economies, and mass migration from the East and Northern Africa into Europe, and from Central America and Venezuela into the United States, right? And this is also pushing further protectionism and the further rise of the far right. And so you're seeing the far right rise not only in the United States, but in Europe. We're seeing Nazist parties rise in places like Denmark, Austria, Germany, etc. You see the far right in lead under Giorgia Meloni in Italy. And so this has been a massive movement, but these are widely considered to be the main causes of this reversion toward protectionism, tariffs, anti-immigration, all of these sorts of things across the developed world. Okay, section 4, the state and multinational corporations. We should also point out that the major players of the post-World War II order are sort of losing ground. So we discussed this in a former chapter about sort of the rise of the power of NGOs relative to the state. But you're also seeing the rise of second and third order nations push back against the developed countries, right? And so in modern times, we see the development of what's called the BRICS bloc, right? So this is BRICS, BRICS. It's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? So these sort of middling up and coming countries pushing back against the international order, against the highly developed rich economies. And so the highly developed and rich economies are sort of losing relative power to these secondary sort of states. You're also seeing another reason for sort of the dearth of these rich nations' power is technological innovation in communication and travel, right? Um, States no longer have a monopoly on these things. And as data spreads across the world, as media coverage spreads across the world, as it becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to communicate and travel across the planet, this reduces the power of these sort of very wealthy states. Another reason for the loss of power of states in general, but especially in wealthy countries, is tax evasion by the hyper wealthy and by multinational corporations. So, recent years have seen the release of the Panama Papers, of all of these tax evasion, um, all of these very, very wealthy individuals shuttling their money into Panama, which is sort of it doesn't really play by the international system of taxation. They allow companies to sort of hide their assets there. And so the release of the Panama Papers showed billions, maybe trillions of dollars of money hidden by wealthy individuals from rich countries so that they don't have to pay taxes, which is a detriment to any normal citizen, normal as in like not hyper wealthy, right? Because that means you're losing social safety nets, you're losing potential infrastructure, you're losing research and development, you're losing investment in schools, in education, all of these sorts of things. And so the Panama Papers are a good example. Panama itself is a good example. And then Switzerland and Ireland are also good modern day examples where they help to hide the hyper wealthy or massive corporations' wealth. You're also seeing mass privatization under neoliberalism. States used to have a lot of power in the fact that they ran things like utilities, right? Electricity, water, all of these sorts of things. As we talked about before, since the Thatcher Reagan era and the movement towards sort of neoliberalism and and privatization, not deprivatization, the move toward privatization, this reduces the power of state governments. The fifth problem that reduces power in modern day is rising inequality, and this causes fury from voters, right? And so we're seeing as the hyper wealthy become even more and more wealthy, right? Look at Elon; he's got 300 to 500 billion dollars. This sort of causes a lot of frustration in these systems. Let's see. Oh, and I guess finally the questionable home base, right? So this is a way that companies like Amazon and Google and others sort of get away with tax evasion. Even though these companies are purportedly American derived, they sort of hide their assets and their factories and others in these very low taxation nations like Ireland, right? And it allows them to escape taxation in their home country and pay far lower tax bracket rates. Okay, section 5, toward global economic governance. I guess, yeah, I would just point out that there has been very little ability to deal with these issues at the international level, right? There's very little agreement on how to set up a straight up, bare minimum tax level for developed economies. And so most of the successful attempts at dealing with some of these things, even though they haven't been all that successful, have been from regional or bilateral trade deals, or bilateral deals on taxation or these sorts of things. So, all right, that's all I've got for this chapter. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you for chapter 9. Have a great day.